Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the view from the opposition, and it's a familiar face this week. Owen Younger, a reporter at Chronicle Live, who was on the podcast last May, when Newcastle headed down to Old Trafford in what was a 3-2 defeat for the Magpies. He provided the view from the opposition then. He's kindly come on again, maybe a little bit reluctantly, given that Man United are in a dismal bit of form. But he is back. Owen, thank you very much for sparing the time. Have you had a nice Christmas?
I have, yeah. It's been lovely. I don't know if you can see, I've got the Man United Christmas jumper on today there as well. So I thought I will, like considering how bad everything's going, I thought I'd still rep the boys in that today. But it's yeah, it's been a nice Christmas. I think everything apart from football I've really enjoyed. So that's been good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've, from a Newcastle point of view, thoroughly enjoyed the Christmas period because we've had a belter few games in the league and cup. And yes, for those who aren't watching and you're listening, I can't tell if it'll be a good thing or a bad thing, considering, as Owen has mentioned, that he's wearing this Christmas jumper. I'm applauding you for it, but it is a god awful. I mean, it's a Man United jumper as he's described there, the old Man United badge, and then Crimbo written on it, where like you would have an
Yeah,
Umbro
there's
kind
the
of logo, and then look at that
yeah.
Santa. For the sponsor, in which who was the sponsor back when Cantona was playing? Anyway,
Sharp,
that's what it's replaced.
sharp at that
Sharp.
point.
There you go.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what? I take it back. That is creative genius there. Absolutely love that. But yes, as you said there, on your Christmas has been a little bit spoiled by the form of Manchester United. They were beaten 2-0 by Wolves down at the Molineux. Not a great performance, but seemingly the same old mistakes that are costing them games, especially when it comes to set pieces and Mr. Onana in goal. So just talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, it's been a funny one. I think since Ruben Amorim took over, I think there's been certainly good sort of patterns of play that we've seen and positives in terms of the build up. I think the finishing hasn't been good enough, but I think especially in these last two games, in the Spurs Cup game as well, it has just been set pieces like you've mentioned. I mean, obviously there was the Arsenal game in the league before that, which was two corners. We were done from then, and I think it is just. I mean, it was never something I can remember us being brilliant at before. I mean, I don't think it was something we were particularly, especially scoring them under Ten Hag. I think we really struggled, but I think we defended them sort of, like no better than anyone else, no worse than anyone else. But there really seems to have been something that's cropped up over the last kind of month and a little bit, but probably 2 months really, where I think from set pieces we're just struggling, and I think it's you often see, sort of you see the camera zoom in and you look and you think there's mismatches between players there in terms of who's marking who. And I mean, it was Howson in the Bournemouth game, and obviously in the Wolves game, it was a case of the goalkeeper not being strong enough and sort of and getting kind of sandwiched between the two players, not being able to get up through sort of no fault of the Wolves players. I mean, it was you have to be stronger in those situations, and then obviously to get done in the last minute as well for that second goal. It was a dismal Boxing Day performance, to be honest. And I think even though we played okay in the first half, it's sort of become a thing where the expectations I feel like are a lot lower. So for us to kind of have an okay performance and think, okay, we can build on this in the second half, and then to have the disaster of the second half like we had yesterday, it's becoming far too regular of an occurrence in my opinion.
I guess over the last week or so, where you've seen Newcastle United set pieces really come on, some really wonderful goals scored from some fantastic routines, does that fill you with a bit of dread heading into this game on the 30th?
Absolutely, I think it's one of those things where we have shown a vulnerability in that sense time and time again, and I think it's not one of those things where it's not like it's a small part of the game that it doesn't come up very often. I mean, you concede corners all the time and free kicks, and it's a very important part of the game that you need to get right. And we've seen teams in the past have a lot of success almost solely from set pieces. I mean, like Arsenal, for example, with as I mentioned, with what they're doing from their set pieces. I mean, it's sort of. I think it's such an important part of the game that despite seeing improvements in other areas and sort of thinking, oh, this is going well, this isn't going well, it's so important, and it's such a sort of big thing that when you see, like you mentioned, that obviously Newcastle are finding a lot of success with their attacking set pieces, it does definitely make you think, how are we going to be able to deal with them, because we've shown no sort of aptitude at being able to do that over the last few weeks.
Yeah, well, that's music to the ears of Newcastle United fans. Let's talk about the new manager then. Played 10, won 4, drawn 1, lost 5. In the match preview, I played a clip of his post-match interview after the Wolves game, and he looked tired. He looked worn out. He looked like a man who's not enjoying himself. I'm not for one second suggesting he's regretted his choice or he's going to quit or anything, but he just looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. I mean, how has it been so up and down? Because I think most people expected this bit of a new manager bounce. It hasn't really happened, and things are really going from bad to worse for him.
I think it's funny because obviously you mentioned him looking sort of tired and worn out. I mean, that was almost the exact opposite of that when he came in. I mean, there was a real sort of energy and kind of confidence about him, which was quite infectious. And I think obviously going from Erik ten Hag and his kind of stoicness, I mean, you would never really know what he was thinking either way. And it was nice to see that sort of he was very emotional and sort of from a positive point of view when he first came in. That was something that I personally was excited about. And then I think it is a case of I mean, I think it's happened with Pep Guardiola recently as well. It is just one of those things where you go on and you have bad runs of form, and it really does look like it takes it out of you. I mean, I think with him, obviously going from what he was doing at Sporting Lisbon, I mean, they hadn't lost a game until he came to Man United, and that really sort of he was on the highest of highs at that point. And I think it's one of those things where he is obviously coming with his idea and his style of play and isn't budging on that. And I mean, for us, it's I think it's good to see a style of play at all, to be completely honest, from that point of view. So I definitely think you watch an entire game and you see positives, and then there's big things that go wrong, and you think, okay, well, they need to be addressed. So I think I can see very much why he's struggling and why he seems like he's sort of down at the moment. But I mean, he came in. What the first thing he said when he came in was that there's going to be difficult moments and we're going to have to suffer, and we very much are doing that. So I think it's. I mean, I imagine it wasn't his plan to maybe even to suffer for as long as we have at this point, and to get the results that we have, especially in the last couple of games. But I think he's sort of. I do still like the idea that he's coming in with an idea and he's sticking with it, and whether it works or doesn't work in certain games, it's kind of like it's a philosophy, and hopefully it's a thing where it will continue to grow despite obviously the difficult performances at the minute.
Now, he asked to stop at Sporting Lisbon until the end of the season. He wanted to come in the summer. Obviously, Man United didn't want that. Talks happened. He agreed to leave Sporting, who have now incidentally sacked the man who replaced him in João Pedro. He's been sacked after, I think, a few weeks in charge. But do you think the fact that Amorim requested to stop until the end of the season and then didn't get his wish, had to change his plans, has that had some sort of impact? Because in my head, I'm thinking, well, you're starting already from a step backwards because you don't actually want to be here right now. That's the bottom line of it. He's come, he didn't want to, and it's obviously it's not played out at the moment how we would have anticipated doing so.
I mean, I definitely think there could be an element of him feeling rushed into the job, and like he would have wanted longer to make plans, and obviously whilst he was still working with sport and to kind of think, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and kind of lay everything out from that point of view. And I think it does sound like the club went to him and sort of were like, we need you, but it's now or never really. And it seems like he's obviously eventually agreed to that and has come at the time that the board and everyone wanted him to. But I think it's a funny one because I think he, again, like came in very confident and sort of if he was feeling like that, he was putting on a brave face and wasn't necessarily showing it. But I think certainly if it was a veil that's maybe been lifted at this point, and you definitely are looking at him thinking, is this something? I mean, I don't necessarily think is it something that he as a manager was ready for, because I think he's a very accomplished manager. I mean, we saw in the win that he got against City. I mean, in the last sort of few games of his tenure, once we already knew he was actually coming to United for Sporting. So I think he very much has the pedigree. It's just a case of whether he was sort of in the right frame of mind almost to come now, because obviously, as you said, he would have fully been planned to be at Sporting until the end of the season, until obviously everything changed. So I think it's a funny one. I think obviously coming to a team where they've signed a lot of players for another manager, with him in mind and with his football in mind, and with the targets that it seems like he's wanted. Obviously, quite a lot of the signings in the summer were Dutch, with Ten Hag obviously still being there. So I mean, certainly that I imagine would have an impact of sort of feeling like you've come into a bit of a foreign place in terms of not knowing it, not being your squad, and kind of not being what you want, and kind of having to make the best of that. So I think there's a few things that have gone into it. But I mean, I definitely think, who knows, it may have been different if he had been allowed that. Maybe Ruud van Nistelrooy had stayed on, and then he'd had longer and then been able to come in at the end of the season. But I suppose it's the situation we're in now. So it's a case of kind of seeing what he can do this season, I think, at this point, in terms of just, getting them out of an awful situation, really.
Given the way they're playing, giving, I imagine, what could be quite a gloomy atmosphere at Old Trafford on Monday, is it the perfect time for Newcastle United to be playing Manchester United, given as well Newcastle's form of late?
I feel like, yeah, I mean, I know we have a difficult run of games. I mean, I was looking at sort of the games before this. We obviously had Wolves and then had Bournemouth before that. And I was thinking there are chances to get 2 wins ahead of what's going to be difficult games. We've got Newcastle, then we've got Liverpool straight after. So I was thinking, this is kind of ahead about 2 weeks ago. This would be a good time to get a couple of wins on the board and prepare for harder games, get a bit of momentum. Obviously, that hasn't happened. The exact opposite has basically happened to that. So you come to a point now, I think, where you're going into these sort of on paper more difficult fixtures and thinking the confidence is at rock bottom. I imagine this is something that might be on the list, but I think our most important player was also not going to be there, which is a big thing, and I'm sure that'll be something we'll get onto. But that's a huge thing for us. I think his influence is so important. So I think missing him is huge. But I think despite that, I mean, everyone anyway, even if he was there, was not going to be going into it on sort of particularly high confidence levels. So I think from the point of view of Newcastle thinking, yeah, we could go to Old Trafford, similar to that Carabao Cup game, I remember. Sort of I believe it was in November of last year, I think, when it was 3-0. I remember Lewis Hall scored that great goal, which pained me at the time, but you kind of sit back and appreciate it was a brilliant goal. But it's one of those things where you think, that kind of a performance, doing that at a time when I don't think we were playing too badly at that point. So they might be looking at us at Old Trafford and thinking there could be a repeat of that, because it's a rare thing that happens in terms of a sort of a Newcastle United win at Old Trafford. But I think if they're looking at any time to get it, then now could definitely be that time.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. And you mentioned there Bruno Fernandes, or he's the player that you're alluding to, who will be missing
Yes.
on Monday, as well as, who is the other person? Utage, as I pronounce it? Ugarte, sorry. Goodness me, my
Ugarte, yes,
pronunciation.
yeah.
My United players is awful, as is my United's current form. Sorry, I had to get that in there. But yeah, Bruno Fernandes and Ugarte both missing. I mean, you've mentioned there that how big of a miss Fernandes will be, but alongside Ugarte as well, I mean, that's a big blow, isn't it?
It is. I think sort of on the Bruno point, first of all, I mean, he, as much as his output hasn't been what it has been for the last couple of years, this season, when you watch us play, I mean, everything still goes through him. Everything positive he is involved in. Sometimes the negative things he's involved in, as well. So I think he's one of those people where you kind of take the bad with the good, in terms of obviously what we saw yesterday. I mean, I think they said he's the first player to get sent off 3 times for us since Nemanja Vidic, who was obviously quite the quite the character and quite used to sort of to getting red cards. So to kind of be up there with him in terms of obviously already being sent off 3 times this season is not ideal, and not the situation you want to be in when you're the major creative force of a team and you're a big miss. But I think with Ugarte as well, he's someone I've really seen growing whilst I've been watching him. He sort of was very much shaky when he first came in, especially under Ten Hag earlier in the season. But I think he's come in and is looking good in this pivot. I think we've missed him when he's not been on the pitch. I think we were better yesterday with him, and I think it's one of those where kind of beyond that as well, he's just sort of very good at breaking up the play and then starting attacks, which is obviously exactly what you want from your defensive midfielder. So it's been interesting to see kind of who'll be playing alongside him. But he's keeping Casemiro out of the team, who's obviously so experienced and so sort of classy on his day. So I think it's a case of he's done very well despite the team not doing great. So I think he is almost as big of a miss in terms of what he does, and his role's very pivotal, in a way that obviously I know people will be thinking, well, Bruno's the big one because he's the creative influence. I think Mount not being there as well, because he's injured again, because he would be the the ideal Bruno replacement if he was there. But I think it really leaves us in a bad position with Ugarte not there in midfield, and then also not having either Bruno or Mount in terms of one of the kind of two creative midfielders behind the striker. So yeah, I think it's they're both going to be big misses in different ways. I mean, I've always loved Bruno. He's been one of my favourite United players in the sort of post Sir Alex era, especially for that sort of first couple of seasons that he had. But yeah, I think we might struggle without him. You just never really see where else the creativity is going to come from, which is the big thing.
I guess from a Newcastle point of view, you look at their midfield three in fantastic form. Joe Linton scored yesterday. Bruno had one ruled out for handball. Tonali scored in previous games. The midfield three Newcastle are just looking absolutely brilliant. So, I mean, you could look at any part of Newcastle's game in recent weeks. And I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, but from your point of view, Owen, you must be fearing the up top, you must be fearing the midfield, and also just how resolute they are at the back.
Well, I do feel like it's a case of everything coming together at once for Newcastle from what I've seen. I mean, Sandro Tonali obviously is the first person I would touch on just because of his sort of. I think it took him a couple of games, as it would when you've been out for as long as you have. But I mean, since then he's looked incredible, and he's looked like he's been in that team for 5 years. He's just fitted in so well, and it's kind of, I feel like he's brought everyone else up a level in terms of his performances. And I think originally there was a definitely a part of me that thought, is he being utilised in that midfield in the right way for him? But I think now kind of seeing him having license to go forward more has been great from a Newcastle fan perspective, and just from a football enjoyer in terms of wanting to see him do well after being out for so long, because I do think he's been a huge part of the recent success. But then I think obviously, like you mentioned, kind of having Bruno and Joe Linton alongside him, who already worked well as a partnership. So I mean, having him to kind of bed in, with them and them working really well. I think obviously Isak's finding form again. He struggled for a little while, but is now scoring goals again, which is an issue for us. I know Gordon scored as well. He'd been very up and down, and for him to now be looking like he's on the right path, it is worryingly for us, like you said, like everything is trending in the right direction for Newcastle ahead of the big game on Monday.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. As I said, Newcastle United can get all 3 points. Just a reminder that this episode is sponsored by NordVPN, so make sure you hit the link in the podcast description box to get a discounted offer on your NordVPN plan. Help protect yourself against the scammers and the hackers. In terms of, I guess, one player to pinpoint, I know you've mentioned Sandro Tonali there, and I've mentioned quite a few names, but is there anyone above all of Newcastle United stars that you are fearing?
I mean, I think we've struggled of late with big aerial presences, and I think obviously if we are looking at set pieces, Newcastle United do have a lot of danger in that area. They have the likes of Isak, they have Joe Linton, they have the likes of sort of Fabian Schär character as well, who is sort of always been very good from set pieces. I mean, taking them and getting on the end of them as well. So he's certainly someone that that would be feared. I think it's sort of. Obviously, when you're looking at set pieces, I mean, we've been done recently from 2 Olympicos. Obviously, having it seems like it doesn't even have to get a touch off anyone for it to be going into our net from a set piece at the minute. I mean, that's happened twice in the space of a couple of weeks, and I think it is just about that kind of set piece delivery, really. And I know obviously that was something that that Trippier has been great at in the past as well. That's kind of his has been his forte for a long time. But I think in terms of it is still the set piece thing that I keep coming back to, because it's just how I've seen us be done so many times. But I guess if I'm moving away from that, it is just sort of the I'd be interested to see how we do deal with Gordon and with Isak's pace as well, because obviously we have that, depending on who's playing in the field. I mean, it's looking like it would potentially be, I mean, maybe sort of Manu Casemiro, I'm thinking, with Eriksen a little bit higher up, if they are wanting that kind of the closest you can get to a Bruno type figure in the attack. But then obviously having those two and having the back five behind, and sort of them there being that disconnect, which obviously Isak will look to sort of thrive in that area. So I think it's interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see how we deal with kind of the sort of frightening pace of both Gordon and Isak when they are running at the centre backs and sort of the full backs on that right hand side as well. So I would say kind of they're their partnership, which looks like it's really starting to blossom, is the thing that, from a defensive point of view, is worrying me slightly.
And how will Man United approach the game in terms of with the ball? Is it a case that they'll have more of possession at Old Trafford and invite Newcastle on, in terms of Newcastle absorbing the pressure and hitting them on the counter, or will Newcastle have more of the ball?
Well, I think it's. I mean, I've always thought that. I mean, especially since over the last 10 years, and definitely in terms of what Ten Hag was trying to do, I think the aim was always to be a transitional team, which I think is why we have often struggled in those games where we are expected to have more of the ball. We are at home, and sort of there becomes kind of a weird catch-22 where you're in a situation where you're thinking, okay, well, we should be controlling this game, not really 100% knowing how to do that, and then kind of getting the game taken away from you and sort of playing in the other team's hands because you feel like you can't play into your own strength. So, I mean, it's definitely in the past I would have said we are better as a counter-attacking team, and that would be how I'd want to see us play. But in terms of in this new system, I think there's more bodies around to pass to, it feels like, and there's kind of sort of to pass those triangles and things, and to keep the ball better. There definitely seems to be it's a better setup for that, I think, in terms of the way Amram's trying to play. But it is just one of those things where obviously you have the two wing backs who are attacking. In the past, obviously we've had Ahmad as one of the potential wing backs, but at the minute it feels like he's looking like Amram wants him further forward because of his outputs being better than anyone else recently. But I think it's a funny one because obviously if we ought to go with the two actual fullbacks as the wing backs, then it might end up looking more like a five, and we're sort of stay a bit more resolute and look to sort of to hit on the break when we can, just because I don't really believe at this point that we are a team where we can keep the ball and frustrate teams and kind of play little clever passes and then get in that way. I feel like when we have scored recently, it's been very much sort of like a blunt object. It's been from a good bit of individual play or a clever pass over the top or something like that. So I can't see it being a game where we have all the ball and try and control it. So it might just end up being similar to what that 3-2 was, just a very sort of end-to-end affair, in terms of there being chances on both sides. But like you mentioned, obviously Newcastle United have been very resolute at the back. So as much as obviously I think that would play into our hands more than trying to keep the ball, I'm not sure if it'll play into our hands on Monday because of the fact that we have looked a lot shakier from a defensive point of view. So I kind of think, giving the other team a chance to hit blows on you while you're trying to do the same thing to them, you kind of both need to be at a similar level defensively, and I don't think that's the case. So as much as that's the way I like to see Man United play, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a thing that'll serve us the best on Monday. Yeah.
And just before I get your score prediction on, do you look at Newcastle and the results they've had of late? And I know they've been against sides, well, actually closer to Manchester United than Newcastle
Yeah.
United. And obviously then they've got and beaten Villa, who had a man sent off. But nonetheless, from a Newcastle point of view, clinical in front of goal, resolute at the back, beating what's in front of them, because it's not always easy to do that, even though in terms of ability and level, there are a bit of a gap. But do you look at them and think, like, why have they found their form right upon visiting Old Trafford?
It does feel like that, and I think it's one of those things where, as I mentioned, obviously we have that the game on Monday, which is definitely going to be difficult, and it's going to be one of those situations where I think I mean, going into the game, I think it's often been the case actually over the last couple of years where it's not quite been an expectation on Newcastle United to get a result against us, but it's considering what it had been obviously years for years previous. It's very much been something where people are looking at it now thinking, yeah, Newcastle can easily go and get something at Old Trafford. It's not kind of like this fortress that it once was, of course. So I think we're definitely looking at it thinking, yeah, this is a worry, especially now. Obviously, like you said, the finding form is late. I mean, being as high as 5th yesterday, in terms of that, feels like it's kind of come out of nowhere really, and sort of it's just getting a few wins strung together in what is such a tightly packed league. I think at this stage it shows you how much of a difference it makes. I mean, going from, I think we were kind of on the similar points kind of 2-3 weeks ago, and then kind of you win a few, we lose a couple, and then all of a sudden it creates that huge gap. So I think it's the table now, I think, better reflects where both teams are in terms of their trajectory. So yeah, I definitely think it's a worry, and I think sort of beyond that as well. I mean, it's not going to get any easier for us. We've got, the best team in the league, in my opinion, Liverpool, again, which pains me to say that, but that's we've got them the week after. So it's a situation where United fans might be thinking we're at home. It's a situation where we could get some sort of result and get momentum from it. But I think if you look at the way the two teams are playing, it really doesn't favour us and favour our kind of potential of getting any result. I mean, I'm not saying of course I would be happy with a draw. I mean, I always want United to win. I always think they can do that. But it's a situation where if Newcastle turn up, play really well, get a couple of goals, get a goal or something, and then we show that fight and battle back and work to get a point. I think at that point it's not something where I would be like, this is too bad of a result because of the fact that where you guys are and where we are. It's a strange one. I think it's where I'm like, if we were to get something and to play well, which is the main thing I want to see at the minute, is if we play well. I guess you never know, but it's certainly not. I'm not going into it with thinking we'll go there and we'll win 3-0 or whatever. I mean, it's definitely not something I can see happening. It's going to be tight, but in my opinion, I'm definitely less confident than I was than I was last time, to be honest.
You don't sound like you're looking forward to it.
Not particularly, no. It's one of those. It's a funny one because I think it's like they're always good games. I mean, I haven't watched I can't remember watching a Man United Newcastle game that hasn't been entertaining from both sides. But I just can't see it. I can't see it going our way in terms of sort of the end result unless we turn up much more resolute from set pieces and playing much better than we have for the last few games. It's one of those things where I'm like, prove me wrong with the performance, but it's a case of that I have to see them playing well over the course of 90 minutes, not for 30 minutes and then, dropping off and having a horrendous second half. So if we're able to sustain what I feel like is a decent performance level for 90 minutes, then maybe we'll get something. But it's like you said, it's not one that I'm particularly looking forward to from the perspective of thinking, yeah, United are going to win this like I have in the past when this fixture's happened.
Well, that remains to be done then, Owen, is to get your score prediction. How is it going to go?
Well, I think as much as I've said, I'm not positive. I like to stay positive, but I'm also going to be realistic. So I think, as I mentioned, I think this is going to be a game with goals. In terms of the two teams being very direct in the way that they play. I think I'm gonna say it'll be a draw. I'm gonna say it'll be a 2-2 draw, just to sit on the fence a little bit. But yeah, I think it's one of those where we can't be expecting to go there and win because of the fact that it's sort of, you have to prove that, and you have to prove that with the performances which we just haven't been seeing. But I also do think, like you mentioned, it's a very good opportunity for Newcastle to play us at such a difficult time. So yeah, I'm seeing a 2-2 draw. I think that would be good. I'd like to see Rasmus Højlund get on the score sheet, because of the fact that he had been doing well. He'd scored a few games in a row in consecutive games. He'd gone off the boil a little bit. I think the manager's sort of rotating between him and Xerxes a little bit in terms of who should be playing. But I'd like to see Højlund get on the score sheet. I think he needs to take a little bit more of the attacking burden for himself. But yeah, I think it'll be 2-2, and I think we'll get something, and I think we'll play all right. But I certainly think it'll be one of those where we won't be coming out of the game thinking necessarily we're heading in the right direction. It'll be one where we think we've done well to get a point out of this. We move on and see what happens then. But yeah, I'm going to go for a draw. I'm not going to say we're going to get beat, but it's certainly not far from my mind that it's a definite possibility. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go 3-1 to Newcastle United, and I apologise in advance to the listeners and viewers because when I'm this confident, Newcastle United, they always slip up. But I just think it's the perfect time to play Manchester United, and if you are as good as a side Newcastle can be and want to be, then this is a game they should be winning, really, and to consolidate their place in the top 6. But Owen, thank you very much as always for popping on and providing the insight into Manchester United. To you guys watching and listening, hit thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave us a rating and review. All your support is much appreciated. Hit that link in the podcast description box for your discount offer on your NordVPN subscription. Have a wonderful new year, and to you as well, Owen. and we will catch you in 2025. We'll see you guys in the new year.